My name is David, and I'm a 34-year-old guy from Ohio who thought I knew what loyalty meant until I learned the hard way. I've been working in construction for 15 years, and I always believed that hard work and dedication would pay off in the end. Boy, was I wrong about that, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about the most satisfying revenge I've ever gotten, and trust me, it's a story that will make you think twice about how you treat people. It all started 5 years ago when I was working as a regular construction worker for Morrison Building Company. The company wasn't huge, but it was well known in our area for building quality homes and small office buildings. The owner, Robert Morrison, was a tough but fair man in his 60s who had built the company from nothing. He started with just a pickup truck and a toolbox 30 years ago, and by the time I joined, he had about 50 employees and was making good money. I remember my first day clearly. I was nervous because I really needed this job. My wife Jessica had just given birth to our son Tommy, and we had medical bills piling up. I walked into the main office in Cedarvale Industrial Park, wearing my cleanest work clothes and hoping to make a good impression. Robert Morrison himself interviewed me. He was a big man with calloused hands and a no-nonsense attitude. He looked me straight in the eye and said, "David, I don't care about fancy degrees or smooth talking. Can you work hard, show up on time, and treat people right?" I told him yes, and he hired me on the spot. From day one, I threw myself into that job like my life depended on it. I showed up 30 minutes early every morning and stayed late whenever needed. I learned everything I could about construction, from basic carpentry to electrical work to plumbing. The other guys started calling me the machine because I never seemed to get tired or take shortcuts. Robert noticed my dedication right away. Within 6 months, he promoted me to crew leader. Within 2 years, I was a site supervisor managing entire projects. I wasn't just doing the work anymore, I was teaching new guys, solving problems, and making sure everything ran smoothly. The best part about working for Morrison Building Company wasn't just the steady paycheck, though that was important with a growing family. It was the culture Robert had created. He treated everyone like family. When someone got sick, he made sure they got time off and help with medical bills. When the company had a good year, everyone got bonuses. He knew all our wives' names and asked about our kids. I'll never forget Christmas 3 years ago. Business had been really good, and Robert surprised everyone with a huge Christmas party. He rented out the entire community center in Cedarvale and hired a DJ. There was more food than we could eat, and he gave everyone gift cards worth $500. But the best part was when he stood up to give a speech. "You people aren't just employees," he said, his voice getting a little shaky. "You're my family. This company exists because of your hard work and loyalty. I sleep well at night knowing I've got the best team in the state working with me." Everyone clapped and cheered. I looked around the room and saw guys who had worked there for 20 years, some who started when they were teenagers. These weren't just jobs to us, this was our livelihood, our identity. We were Morrison's crew, and we were proud of it. That's when I first met Brittany Morrison, Robert's daughter. She was home from college for the holidays, and Robert brought her to the party. She was 22 then, tall and blonde, wearing expensive clothes that probably cost more than I made in a week. She seemed nice enough, shaking hands with everyone and smiling for photos. "Brittany studying business administration at Northwestern University," Robert announced proudly. "She's going to join the company after graduation and help us grow even bigger." At the time, I thought that was great news. The company was doing well, and having fresh ideas from someone with a college education seemed like it could only help us. Robert was getting older, and it made sense that he'd want to pass the business on to family. Over the next 2 years, I continued to excel at my job. Robert started giving me more responsibilities, and my salary grew to $75,000 a year, which was really good money in our area. Jessica and I were able to buy a nice house in Millbrook Heights, and we even started saving for Tommy's college fund. I became Robert's right-hand man for the biggest projects. When we got the contract to build the new medical center downtown, a $2 million job, Robert put me in charge of the entire construction team. It was the biggest project in the company's history, and he trusted me to handle it. "David," he told me one day as we stood on the construction site, "I've been in this business for 30 years, and I've never met anyone with your work ethic. You remind me of myself when I was your age." That meant everything to me. Robert had become like a father figure, and knowing I had his respect made all the long hours and hard work worth it. The medical center project went perfectly. We finished 2 weeks ahead of schedule and came in under budget by $150,000. The client was so happy that they recommended us to 3 other companies for future projects. Robert was over the moon. "This is it, David," he said, patting me on the back. "This is what's going to take Morrison Building Company to the next level. We're going to be bidding on projects worth $5 million or more." Around this time, Brittany graduated from college and started working at the company. At first, she worked in the office handling paperwork and learning about the business side of things. She was polite to everyone and seemed eager to learn. I helped her understand how construction projects actually worked, explaining the difference between what looked good on paper and what worked in the real world. "Thank you for being so patient with me, David," she said after I spent an afternoon explaining how we schedule different trades on a construction site. "I know I have a lot to learn, but I want to make Dad proud." I liked her attitude. She wasn't acting like she knew everything just because she had a college degree. She asked good questions and seemed to genuinely care about understanding the business. For about a year, everything was great. The company kept growing, we were getting bigger contracts, and everyone was making good money. Robert started talking about retirement, saying he wanted to travel with his wife and maybe buy a cabin up north. "I'm thinking of stepping back in a couple of years," he told me during one of our regular project meetings. "Brittany's really getting the hang of things, and I know she'll do great running this place." I was happy for both of them. Robert deserved to enjoy his retirement after working so hard for so many years, and Brittany seemed like she'd be a good boss. She had learned the business well and treated everyone with respect. But then Robert got sick. It started with him feeling tired all the time, then he started losing weight. At first, he just said he was working too hard and needed to slow down. But when he collapsed on a job site in front of everyone, we knew something was seriously wrong. The doctors found cancer. It was bad, the kind that spreads fast and doesn't give you much time. Robert tried to keep working at first, but the treatments made him too weak. Within 3 months, he went from being this strong, commanding presence to a frail man who could barely walk across the office. "David," he called me into his office one day in early spring. He looked terrible, thin and pale, but his eyes still had that determined look. "I need to talk to you about something important." I sat down across from his desk, the same desk where he'd hired me 5 years earlier. The office looked the same, with his construction awards on the walls and photos of completed projects, but everything felt different now. "The doctors say I don't have long," he said quietly. "Maybe 6 months if I'm lucky. I need to make sure this company survives after I'm gone." My throat felt tight. Robert wasn't just my boss, he was a mentor and friend. The thought of losing him was devastating. "I'm going to officially make Brittany the CEO," he continued. "She's smart, she's learned the business, and she's got fresh ideas that will help us compete with the bigger companies. But David, I need you to promise me something." "Anything, Mr. Morrison. I need you to help her. She's got the education and the business sense, but you've got the experience and the relationships with our clients. Together, you two can keep this company growing and take care of all our employees." I promised him I would do everything I could to help Brittany succeed. At that moment, I meant every word. I owed Robert everything, and if helping his daughter was what he needed, then that's what I'd do. Robert made the official announcement the next week. Brittany Morrison was now the CEO of Morrison Building Company. Robert would remain as chairman of the board but would step back from day-to-day operations immediately. The announcement was met with mixed reactions. Some of the older guys who had worked with Robert for decades were worried about working for someone so young. Others thought it was great that the company would stay in the Morrison family. I made sure to speak up in support of Brittany at the meeting. "I've worked closely with Brittany over the past year," I told everyone. "She knows this business inside and out now, and she's got great ideas for growing the company." Mr. Morrison made the right choice. After the meeting, Brittany came up to me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, David. That means so much coming from you. I know Dad thinks the world of you, and having your support makes me feel like I can actually do this." For the first few weeks, everything seemed fine. Brittany was making small changes, mostly to the office procedures and computer systems. She updated our project management software and created better systems for tracking expenses and schedules. The changes made sense and actually made everyone's job easier. I continued managing the biggest construction projects while also helping Brittany learn more about the operational side of the business. We had several meetings each week where I'd explain what was happening on each job site and what challenges we were facing. Robert's condition got worse quickly. By summer, he was spending most of his time in the hospital. I visited him whenever I could, usually after work or on weekends. He always asked about the company and seemed relieved that things were running smoothly. "You're doing exactly what I hoped you would do," he told me during one of my visits. Brittany tells me the projects are all on schedule and the clients are happy. I can rest easy knowing the company is in good hands with you two working together. Robert Morrison passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in early August. The funeral was huge, with hundreds of people from all over the construction industry. Every single employee from Morrison Building Company was there, along with clients, suppliers, and competitors who respected what Robert had built. I was one of the pallbearers, along with Robert's brother and some of his oldest friends. As we carried his casket into the church, I thought about everything he had taught me and promised myself that I would honor his memory by continuing to give my best to the company he had created. After the funeral, there was a reception at the same community center where we'd had that Christmas party 3 years earlier. Brittany gave a beautiful speech about her father and how much the company meant to him. My father always said that Morrison Building Company wasn't just about constructing buildings, she said. It was about building relationships, building trust, and building a future for everyone who worked here. I promise you that I will never forget that. Everyone clapped, and I felt confident that Brittany would continue her father's legacy of treating employees well and maintaining the family atmosphere that made Morrison Building Company special. But everything changed exactly 1 week later. That's when Brittany called a mandatory all-hands meeting at 8 a.m. on a Monday morning. Everyone gathered in the main conference room, wondering what this was about. The mood was still somber from Robert's recent death, but we all assumed Brittany wanted to talk about moving forward as a company. Brittany walked into the room wearing a sharp business suit, carrying a folder full of papers. Her whole demeanor was different from the nervous but eager young woman I'd been working with. She looked cold and determined, like she was about to deliver bad news. "Good morning, everyone," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I know this has been a difficult time for all of us, losing my father, but now it's time to focus on the future of Morrison Building Company." She opened her folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. "I've been reviewing our operations, finances, and staffing levels. While my father built something wonderful here, I believe we need to make some significant changes to remain competitive in today's market." Our uncomfortable silence fell over the room. This didn't sound like the Brittany who had been working alongside us for the past year. This sounded like a completely different person. "Effective immediately, we will be restructuring our workforce to improve efficiency and reduce costs," she continued. "This means we'll be saying goodbye to some employees whose positions are no longer necessary." My heart started beating faster. I looked around the room and saw the same worried expressions on everyone's faces. These weren't just jobs she was talking about, these were people's livelihoods, families who depended on Morrison Building Company. Brittany started reading names from her list. "Tom Williams, your position as equipment maintenance supervisor is being eliminated. We'll be outsourcing that work to save money. Please clean out your desk today." Tom had worked for the company for 12 years. He had 2 kids in high school and a mortgage. I watched his face go white as he realized he'd just been fired. She continued down the list. "Jennifer Lopez, we're eliminating the administrative assistant position. Maria Santos, we no longer need 2 bookkeepers." One by one, she was firing people who had been loyal employees for years. These weren't deadbeats or troublemakers, these were hardworking people who had families to support. Additionally, Brittany announced, "We'll be implementing new policies regarding overtime, sick days, and vacation time. The days of treating this company like a charity are over. We need to operate like a real business." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This was the same woman who had thanked me for helping her learn the business just a few months ago. This was Robert Morrison's daughter, and she was destroying everything he had built. But I was sure she wouldn't fire me. I was Robert's right-hand man. I managed the biggest projects and brought in the most money for the company. I had given 5 years of my life to Morrison Building Company, working nights and weekends, always putting the company first. Then Brittany looked directly at me, and I saw something in her eyes that made my blood run cold. It wasn't respect or appreciation. It was something much worse. And finally, she said, her voice getting slightly louder, "We need new leadership for our construction operations. Someone with fresh ideas and a modern approach to project management." The room was completely silent now. Everyone was looking at me because they knew I was the head of construction operations. I was the one who managed all the projects and supervised most of the crew. "David Harrison," Brittany said, looking me straight in the eye, "your employment with Morrison Building Company is terminated effective immediately. Please gather your personal belongings and leave the premises within the hour." The room erupted in shocked gasps and angry whispers. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some mistake. Brittany, I said, my voice shaking, can we talk about this privately? I think there's been some misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, David, she replied coldly. This decision is final. Security will escort you to your office to collect your things. I looked around the room at my co-workers, people I'd worked beside for 5 years. Some of them had tears in their eyes. Others looked angry, but there was nothing anyone could do. Brittany Morrison was now the owner of the company, and she had just fired the one person her father trusted most. As I walked out of that conference room, my mind was reeling. How could this be happening? Just a week ago, Brittany had been telling me how much she appreciated my help and how she couldn't run the company without me. Now she was throwing me out like garbage. But as devastating as this moment was, I had no idea that it was just the beginning of something much bigger. Because Brittany Morrison had just made the biggest mistake of her life, and she didn't even know it yet. The security guard walked me to my office, where I slowly packed my personal items into a cardboard box. 5 years of hard work, 5 years of loyalty, 5 years of building relationships and completing projects, and it all ended with me carrying a box to my truck while people watched from the windows. As I drove away from Morrison Building Company for the last time as an employee, I couldn't stop thinking about my promise to Robert Morrison. I had sworn to help his daughter succeed, and she had repaid that loyalty by destroying my career and my family's financial security. But what Brittany didn't know, what she couldn't have known when she made the decision to fire me, was that I knew something about Morrison Building Company that could change everything. Something that her father had shared with me in confidence, something that could either save the company or destroy it completely. And as I sat in my truck in the parking lot, watching the building where I'd spent the best years of my working life, I realized that Brittany Morrison was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the importance of treating people with respect. The war was just beginning, and she had no idea what she had started. Chapter 2. I sat in my truck for almost an hour, just staring at the Morrison Building Company sign. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from pure anger. How could someone be so heartless? How could Brittany destroy her father's legacy and throw away loyal employees like we were nothing? Jessica was going to be devastated. We had a mortgage payment of $1,800 coming up next week, and Tommy needed new school clothes. I had always been the steady provider, the one who brought home a reliable paycheck. Now I had to go home and tell my wife that I'd been fired for no good reason. But as I drove home through the familiar streets of Millbrook Heights, my anger started turning into something else. I kept thinking about that secret Robert had shared with me, the one piece of information that Brittany didn't know existed. Maybe getting fired was going to be the best thing that ever happened to me. You see, what Brittany didn't realize was that 6 months before Robert died, he had pulled me aside for a very private conversation. It was late on a Friday afternoon, and everyone else had gone home. Robert asked me to stay behind because he wanted to show me something important. David, he said, leading me into his office and closing the door, there's something I need to tell you about this company. Something that could be very valuable someday, but right now it's our little secret. He walked over to his filing cabinet and pulled out a folder I'd never seen before. Inside were old documents, surveys, and what looked like geological reports. When I bought the land for our main office and warehouse 20 years ago, Robert explained, I got a great deal because everyone thought this area would never develop. But I had these soil tests done because I wanted to make sure the foundation would be solid. He spread the documents across his desk. The tests showed something interesting. There's a massive limestone deposit running right under our property and extending for about 2 miles in each direction. I looked at the papers, not really understanding why this was important. Okay, Mr. Morrison. What does that mean exactly? Robert smiled. David, that limestone is extremely high quality, the kind that construction companies pay big money for. We're talking about millions of tons of material that could be worth $20 to $30 per ton. My eyes widened as I did the math in my head. That's millions of dollars. More like tens of millions, Robert said. But here's the thing, the mining rights don't automatically come with the property. You have to apply for them separately through the state. I never bothered because the construction business was going so well, and mining is a completely different industry. He put the documents back in the folder, but if someone wanted to, they could apply for those mining rights and potentially make more money from this land than we make in 10 years of construction projects. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Robert looked serious. Because if something happens to me, if I die or get too sick to run the company, I want someone I trust to know about this. Brittany's smart, but she's young and doesn't have experience with these kinds of decisions. You've got good judgment, David. If the time ever comes when this information could help the company or help you, I want you to use it." He handed me a copy of all the documents. "Keep these safe. Don't tell anyone about them unless you absolutely have to. This could be insurance for the future." I took the folder home and hid it in my personal safe, never thinking I'd actually need to use the information. But now, sitting in my driveway after being fired, I realized that Robert Morrison might have just given me the key to the perfect revenge. When I walked into my house, Jessica took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, setting down the laundry she'd been folding. "Brittany fired me," I said simply, "along with about 10 other people." Jessica's face went pale. "What? Why? I thought she liked you. I thought you were helping her learn the business." I told her the whole story, from the meeting to being escorted out by security. Jessica started crying, not just because I'd lost my job, but because she was angry about how I'd been treated. "After everything you did for that company," she said through her tears. "After all the overtime, all the weekends you worked, all the times you put that job before everything else. This is how they repay you?" That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those mining reports hidden in my safe. I kept thinking about Brittany's cold voice when she fired me. But mostly, I kept thinking about my promise to Robert Morrison. He had asked me to help his daughter succeed, but what if helping her succeed meant teaching her a lesson about how to treat people? What if the best thing I could do for Robert's memory was to show Brittany the consequences of destroying everything he had built? The next morning, I called my friend Mike Patterson, who worked for the State Mining Commission. Mike and I had gone to high school together, and he'd helped me understand regulations when Morrison Building Company had worked near some old mining sites. "Mike, I need to ask you about something," I said. "Hypothetically, if someone wanted to apply for mining rights on a piece of property, how would they go about doing that?" "Well, first they'd need to have geological surveys proving there's something worth mining," Mike explained. "Then they'd file an application with our office, pay the fees, and go through the approval process." "Why do you ask?" "Just curious about a piece of land I'm looking at," I lied. "How long does the approval process usually take?" "If everything's in order and there are no environmental issues, usually about 6 months. But David, mining operations are expensive to start up. You need serious money to get into that business." After I hung up, I spent the next few hours researching mining companies online. I learned about the process, the costs, and most importantly, the potential profits. Robert had been right about the value of high-quality limestone. Construction companies, road builders, and concrete manufacturers were always looking for reliable suppliers. But I also learned something else, something that made my revenge plan even more perfect. If someone applied for mining rights on a piece of property, the current property owner had to be notified. They would get a chance to object or to apply for the rights themselves. But here's the key part: if the property owner didn't respond within 60 days, the mining rights would automatically be granted to whoever applied first. I started to smile for the first time since getting fired. Brittany Morrison had no idea about the value of the land under her company. She had no idea that someone could potentially make millions of dollars by mining that limestone. And she definitely had no idea that her father had already done the geological surveys that proved the deposit existed. Over the next few weeks, I watched Morrison Building Company from a distance. I still had friends who worked there, and they kept me updated on what was happening. The news wasn't good. Brittany had fired so many experienced people that the remaining workers were struggling to complete projects on time. The new policies she had implemented were making everyone miserable. Several long-time clients had started complaining about delays and quality issues. "It's a disaster, David," my friend Carlos told me when we met for coffee. "She hired this fancy project management consultant from the city to replace you, but the guy doesn't know anything about actual construction. We're behind schedule on every job." "What about the medical center extension project?" I asked. That was a $1.5 million job that I had been managing before getting fired. Carlos shook his head. 3 weeks behind schedule and going over budget. The client is furious. They are threatening to find another contractor to finish the job. This was exactly what I had expected. Brittany had gotten rid of the people who actually knew how to run construction projects and replaced them with people who only knew theory from business school. But hearing about it still made me sad because I knew Robert would have been heartbroken to see his company struggling. Meanwhile, I had started putting my plan into action. Using the geological surveys Robert had given me, I created a proposal for mining rights on the Morrison Building Company property. I formed a limited liability company called Millbrook Limestone Extraction and officially applied for the mining rights through the state. The application fee was $5,000, which was almost all the money Jessica and I had in our savings account. But I knew it would be worth it if my plan worked. "Are you sure about this?" Jessica asked when I told her what I was doing. "That's all the money we have left. Trust me," I said. "This is going to work. And when it does, Brittany Morrison is going to regret the day she decided to fire me." The State Mining Commission processed my application quickly because I had all the required documentation. Within 2 weeks, they sent an official notice to Morrison Building Company informing them that someone had applied for mining rights on their property. Now came the waiting game. According to the law, Brittany had 60 days to respond to the notice. She could object to the mining rights, apply for them herself, or simply ignore the notice. If she ignored it, the rights would automatically be granted to me. I was betting that Brittany would ignore the notice. She was busy trying to save her failing construction company, and a letter about mining rights probably wouldn't seem important to someone who didn't understand what was underneath her property. While I waited, I started looking for work with other construction companies. The good news was that my reputation in the industry was solid. Everyone knew I was a hard worker and a skilled project manager. The bad news was that word had gotten around about why I was fired, and some companies were hesitant to hire someone who might have problems with management. After 3 weeks of interviews, I finally got an offer from Riverside Construction, a smaller company that specialized in residential projects. The pay was only $55,000 a year, which was $20,000 less than I'd been making at Morrison Building Company, but it was better than being unemployed. "We'd love to have someone with your experience," the owner, Frank Riverside, told me. "I've heard great things about your work from several clients. I know you're probably used to managing bigger projects, but we're a growing company and there's opportunity for advancement." I took the job and started the following Monday. It felt strange being the new guy again after 5 years of being the go-to person at Morrison Building Company. But my new co-workers were friendly, and the work environment was relaxed and professional. The best part about my new job was that Frank Riverside treated his employees well. He offered good health insurance, fair overtime pay, and actually listened to suggestions from his workers. It reminded me of how Morrison Building Company used to be under Robert's leadership. "I believe in taking care of the people who take care of me," Frank explained during my first week. "Happy employees do better work, and better work means happy clients. It's not complicated." About a month into my new job, Carlos called me with an update on Morrison Building Company. "David, you're not going to believe this," he said, sounding worried. "We lost the medical center extension contract. The client fired us and hired Riverside Construction to finish the job." I almost laughed out loud. The client had unknowingly hired my new company to fix the problems created when Brittany fired me. "How's everyone taking it?" "Morale is terrible," Carla said. "We've lost 3 more big contracts this month. Brittany hired another consultant to figure out what's wrong, but everyone knows the problem is that she got rid of all the experienced people." "What about Brittany herself? How's she handling all this?" "She's stressed out and angry all the time. She keeps blaming everyone else for the company's problems. Yesterday she yelled at Jenny in accounting for 20 minutes because a report was 2 hours late." I felt a little sorry for the remaining employees who were dealing with Brittany's poor leadership, but I didn't feel sorry for Brittany herself. She had created this situation by being cruel and ungrateful to the people who had made the company successful. 2 weeks later, Frank Riverside called me into his office with some interesting news. "David, I just got off the phone with the biggest potential client of my career," he said, barely able to contain his excitement. Morrison Building Company was supposed to build a new shopping complex for Hartman Development Group. It's a $4 million project. My heart started racing. I knew about the Hartman project. It had been in development for over a year, and Robert Morrison had been working on the proposal before he died. "What happened?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Morrison Building Company is so behind on their current projects that Hartman doesn't trust them to handle something this big. They asked around for recommendations, and several people told them about you. They want Riverside Construction to submit a proposal, with you as the lead project manager." This was unbelievable. Not only was I going to get a chance to work on the biggest project of my career, but I was going to take it away from the company that had fired me. "There's one catch," Frank continued. "It's such a big project that we'll need to partner with another company to handle all the work. I'm thinking about approaching some of the experienced guys who used to work at Morrison Building Company. I heard several of them are looking for work." "That's a great idea," I said. "I know exactly who you should call." Over the next few days, Frank reached out to Tom Williams, the equipment maintenance supervisor Brittany had fired. He also contacted 2 of the project managers and 3 of the most skilled craftsmen who had been let go. All of them were eager to work for a company that would appreciate their skills. It's like getting the band back together, Tom joked when we met to discuss the Hartman project. Except now we're working for someone who won't fire us for no reason. While we were preparing our proposal for the Hartman Development Group, I was also keeping track of the mining rights situation. I had submitted my application 7 weeks ago, which meant Brittany had only 1 week left to respond to the state's notice. Every day, I checked the mail hoping to see some indication that Morrison Building Company had figured out what was happening. But there was nothing. No lawyers calling, no angry phone calls from Brittany, no sign that anyone at the company understood what they were about to lose. On a Thursday evening, exactly 8 weeks after I had applied for the mining rights, I got a call from Mike Patterson at the State Mining Commission. "David, I wanted to give you a heads up," he said. "The 60-day response period expired yesterday, and Morrison Building Company never replied to our notice. Your application for mining rights has been approved." I could barely believe it. My plan had actually worked. I now owned the mining rights to land that could potentially be worth millions of dollars, and Brittany Morrison had no idea what had just happened. "What's the next step?" I asked Mike. "Well, you'll get the official paperwork in the mail next week. After that, you can start the process of finding investors and setting up mining operations. Just remember, you'll need to follow all environmental regulations and get the proper permits." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone. For the first time in 2 months, I felt like I had some power back. Brittany Morrison had thought she could destroy my career and ruin my life without consequences. She was about to learn how wrong she had been, but I wasn't ready to reveal my hand just yet. I wanted to wait for the perfect moment, when the lesson would have the maximum impact. And based on what Carlos had been telling me about Morrison Building Company's financial problems, that moment was coming soon. The next week brought even more good news. Riverside Construction won the Hartman Development Group contract. Our proposal had been professional, detailed, and competitive, partly because I knew exactly what Morrison Building Company had planned to charge for the same work. "This is the biggest contract in our company's history," Frank announced at our Monday morning meeting. "And it's all thanks to David's reputation and expertise. Everyone on this project is getting a $2,000 bonus when we complete it." I felt proud and vindicated. Here was a company that appreciated good work and rewarded loyalty, everything that Morrison Building Company used to be under Robert Morrison's leadership. That afternoon, I got a call that I had been both expecting and dreading. It was Carlos, and he sounded devastated. "David, I have bad news. Morrison Building Company is in serious financial trouble. We might have to close down completely." "What happened?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Losing the Hartman contract was the final straw. "We owe suppliers about $800,000, and we've got penalty clauses in contracts we can't complete on time. Brittany hired an accountant to look at our books, and he says we might be bankrupt within 3 months." This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Morrison Building Company was failing because Brittany had destroyed the culture and expertise that made it successful. Now she was about to face the consequences of her terrible decisions. "Is Brittany looking for ways to save the company?" I asked. "She's desperate. She's trying to sell equipment, lay off more people, anything to raise cash. Yesterday she even talked about selling the main office building and warehouse, but nobody wants to buy commercial property in this economy." I smiled to myself. Brittany Morrison had no idea that she was sitting on a gold mine, literally. The limestone under her property could solve all her financial problems and save her company, but she didn't know it existed, and she was about to lose the rights to mine it forever. It was time to make my move. But I wasn't going to just call Brittany and gloat about what I had done. That would be too easy, and it wouldn't teach her the lesson she needed to learn. Instead, I was going to give her a chance to understand exactly how badly she had treated people and exactly how much her cruelty was going to cost her. I spent the weekend preparing for what would be the most satisfying conversation of my life. On Monday morning, I was going to call Brittany Morrison and make her an offer she couldn't refuse. An offer that would force her to confront the consequences of firing the one person who could have saved her company. But first, I wanted to give her one final chance to do the right thing. Because despite everything she had done to me and my former co-workers, I still remembered my promise to Robert Morrison. If Brittany was willing to admit her mistakes and treat people better, maybe we could find a way to work together to save her father's company. However, something told me that Brittany Morrison wasn't the type of person who would admit she was wrong or apologize for how she had treated people. Something told me that she was about to make this situation much worse for herself, and when she did, I would be ready with the surprise that would change everything.